Hello everyone, good morning. Sage here, live from the Kalkine studios, and you're watching the early trades. Let us cast an eye over how the Australian market charter is panning out today. Well, the Australian share market opened the new financial year on a slightly weaker note as lockdowns and movement restrictions in various parts of Australia on the back of surging coronavirus cases of the Delta variant are spoiling the investors' sentiment. Meanwhile, the global equities retraced from their recent highs on Wednesday as the Asian markets became worried about a resurgence of the COVID-19 cases. In addition, Western markets were cautious ahead of the US jobs report on Friday, which might dictate the future course of action for the monetary policy by the US Fed. The rise of equity markets worldwide has been buoyed over the past year by trillions of dollars of monetary stimulus by central banks and governments in response to the coronavirus pandemic. And now the success of the vaccination drives in some countries has fueled an economic recovery, taking the consumer confidence index to 1.5-year highs in the US and 21-year highs in Europe. Given the economic revival attained, all eyes in the market are now glued to the US Fed's monetary policy decisions. Looking at the market open trades, the bottom performing stocks in the index were seen to be Lendlease Group and Metcash. Lendlease slipped on providing disappointing profit guidance, and engineering the company Worley were among the top losers on the board despite being awarded 2 operations and maintenance service contracts from Pacific Hydro. And on the flip side, construction material company Adbri, formerly known as Adelaide Brighton, was the top gainer, mostly posting its Mawson's joint venture signing as an agreement to purchase the Millbrae concrete and aggregate business. Then Mesoblast soared on announcing its potential meeting with the US Food and Drug Administration about the back pain drug. And besides that, gold stocks are charged up today. Ramelius Resources stood among the top 5 gainers. Energy players are also pumped up amid the oil price uptick. And well, before we jump to the ASX charter for today in detail, let us look at the overnight US market performance. And on Wall Street, the Dow Jones rose 0.6%, while the S&P 500 was up 0.13%. And meanwhile, the Nasdaq Composite Index dropped 0.17%. According to data released on Wednesday, the US private payrolls increased by 692,000 jobs in June of 2021, which is more than estimates, but less than the 886,000 jobs added in May of 2021. The data pushed the S&P 500 to a near all-time high on Wednesday. However, investors are still eyeing on the move of comprehensive US non-farm payrolls figures due to be out on Friday. Then the yields on the longer-dated US Treasuries dropped to their lowest levels in more than a week amid a report showing a solid jump in private payrolls in June 2021. The benchmark 10-year yield was last down 3.2 basis points at 1.45%. Moving on now to the currency space, the US dollar had risen to a 2.5-month peak, posting its biggest monthly gains since November 2016. The demand for the US dollar was supported by a surprisingly hawkish shift in the US Fed's interest rate outlook and rising concerns over the outbreak of the Delta coronavirus variant. And meanwhile, the Australian and New Zealand dollars remained under pressure yesterday as the spread of the highly contagious Delta variant of COVID-19 has shaken investors' confidence in economic recoveries for many countries across the globe, including Australia. And now it's time for a short break, but please stay tuned as I'll be back with more trending updates for the Australian market. Crypto talk by Kalkine. The crypto market has been red hot given the Bitcoin rally since the past year. And now the most famous cryptocurrency has got competitors, Dogecoin and Ethereum. If the crypto market excites you, tune in with me, Sage, to know the latest developments about the existing digital currencies and the new ones that are joining the race. I'll help you understand the opportunities and the risks the crypto market has in store for you. For all the digital currency related developments, continue watching Crypto Talk by Kalkine. Welcome back, Sage here, your host, live from the Kalkine studios, and you're watching the early trades. Well, now that we have taken a glimpse at the US market performance, let us look at the major newsmakers in the Australian share market. And to begin with, Lendlease dipped on providing profit guidance. The multinational construction, property and infrastructure company has indicated statutory profit after tax of between 200 to 320 million Australian dollars for the financial year 2020 to 21. And following a year of challenging operating conditions associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, the company said it faced a delay in the expected timing of securing an investment partner for International Quarter London. It had also experienced weaker rental demand and lower rents on the recently completed residential for rent buildings at Elephant Park in London, impacting the profitability of the first two residential for rent buildings. And meanwhile, the next stock under the spotlight is also a real estate player. Charter Hall Long Whale REIT soared on upgrading guidance for its 2022 financial year. The trust said it expected operating earnings per share of 29.2 cents per security for the financial year 2021, representing a growth of 3.2% on the previous year's figures. It also upgraded its next year's operating earnings per share guidance to growth of no less than 4.5%. Then the next newsmaker worth looking at is the prominent pharmaceutical group. Mesoblast soared on announcing its potential meeting with the US Food and Drug Administration about back pain during the current quarter. And the company will discuss the regulatory approval for its back pain drug, Rexlemestrocel L, the drug following patient phase 3 trials in patients with chronic inflammatory back pain due to degenerative disc disease. And the condition is a major driver of demand for opioids in the US, which have contributed to an addiction crisis across the country in the past decade. And moving on now to the next news, Cooper Energy slid on downgrading production guidance for the 2021 financial year down to 2.6 million barrels of oil equivalent. And Cooper Energy is an oil and gas exploration company focusing its activities in the Cooper Basin of South Australia. Its previous guidance was between 2.7 and 2.9 million barrels. The company blamed interruptions to operations during May and June, and it refined its sales guidance too, saying it expected sales volumes of 3 million barrels of oil equivalent. It had previously guided between 2.9 million and 3.1 million barrels. Next up, engineering company Worley dipped despite being awarded 2 operations and maintenance services contracts from Pacific Hydro. Under the contracts, Worley will provide full asset management operations and maintenance services across 196 wind turbines and the associated balance of plant with a total engineering or generating capacity of 360 megawatts. The contracts were awarded through Pacific Hydro's subsidiary Energy Pacific. And now it's time for a short break, but please stay tuned as I'll be back with more of the trending updates for the Australian market shortly.
Tune in to get the latest information.
Whether it's about market movements or the currency graph,
Sectoral coverage or industry news.
we cover it all on our news segments.
Be on top of the latest news
With Kalkine TV.
Welcome back. This is Sage, your host, live from Kalkine Studio, and you are watching the Early Trades Show. Let us glance through the ASX sectoral charter. Well, the Australian technology shares traded mixed while the mild profit booking was seen in the US technology space, leading to a fall of 0.18% in the Nasdaq 100 after making a record high on Tuesday. And Xero and WiseTech traded in the red, while Afterpay, Zipco and Nearmap traded higher. And meanwhile, the Australian energy majors such as Woodside Petroleum, Beach Energy and Oil Search are trading in the green after the crude oil prices ticked up. And on Wednesday, crude oil prices increased, marking a high quarterly gain after the US crude stockpiles fell for a 6th consecutive week, coupled with an OPEC's report foreseeing a tight supply in the market this year. And the Brent crude oil futures contract for August closed the session 0.5% up at $75 US per barrel, while the US West Texas Intermediate crude oil futures settled 0.7% up as well at $73.50 US per barrel. And now we'll take a look at the miners space. Heavyweight miners BHP Group and Rio Tinto slid amid the Chinese commodity crackdown. On Wednesday, iron ore futures on the Dalian Commodity Exchange registered a 7th straight quarterly gain, following by a slump in the Chinese steel mills' profit margins, weighing on the prices in the final trading sessions of June 2021. And the most actively traded iron ore futures for September month delivery on China's DCE ended 0.7% lower at 1,165 yuan, or in US terms $180.50 per tonne. And meanwhile, the copper recorded its biggest monthly fall since March 2020 as a threat of higher or tighter US monetary policies, a stronger US dollar and moves by China to keep a check on prices pull the industrial metals from the record highs. And on that note, ASX-listed copper players Oz Minerals and Sandfire Resources traded in the red during the early trading hours today. And now we'll take a look at the yellow metal space. Newcrest Mining, Ramelius Evolution Mining and Northern Star Resources edged higher. On Wednesday, gold nudged up but headed for its largest monthly fall since November 2016 as investors maintained a cautious stance ahead of the upcoming US jobs data on Friday that could intensify fears over the US Fed easing its asset purchases. And thanks for joining us on that report. That's all for now, but we will be bringing more of the stock updates to our upcoming live shows. Please stay tuned for more live updates and expert talks on Kalkine TV across the economy, markets and sectors. Stage signing off for now.